So this is BBL Lab, Mars Lab, and today I'm with none other than British basketball, media, well, former British basketball, but still media star Tom Bonnet. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, mate. Yeah, I'm really good. How are you?
I'm not bad. But as we briefly spoke about them, we'll forget about Manchester United for today. But yeah, so
yeah.
So for those that don't know, I guess kind of explain who you are, your background and kind of all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tom. I'm 22 years old, from Hornby in Hampshire. I guess the reason that I'm on this podcast is because I spent 18 months doing marketing and media for the Surrey Scorchers in the British Basketball League. Long story short, I was a fan of the Guildford Heat as a child, and went to a few games, and then ultimately ended up supporting the Scorchers. And then while I was studying to become a journalist, which is what I always wanted to do, I did some work experience for a season with the Scorchers, just doing like game day media stuff like what you've done, Marcel, actually. And then a couple of years down the line, I'd been a journalist for a little while, and then a full-time position opened up at Scorchers to be a marketing and communications officer. And I got that job back in October 2019, which feels like 5 years ago, because of the pandemic. And then I did that for 18 months, obviously was there during the pandemic. And then in April this year, I moved on to Southampton in football in the Premier League. So I've been a marketing exec for 6 months now at Southampton. But yeah, so a bit of a whirlwind few years, but really, really happy with how things have gone so far.
Yeah. So you mentioned, being a fan, but kind of what made you want to start, like you said, you mentioned, being a journalist, that's kind of what you always wanted to do, but what was there anything that, put that in your mind and made that kind of the dream, kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So, I got into basketball as probably 9 or 10 years old, because my older brother played basketball at school. So we had a hoop out in our front garden to begin with. And then because of his passion for it, we went down to a few Guildford Heat games, and kind of I got the knack for it then. And then naturally, because we're in the UK, I was a big football fan growing up. But then when I got to 13, 14, I really got into the NBA, started following that quite passionately. And then ultimately went back to support the Scorchers, and it just so happened they just refounded as the Scorchers. So I kind of went to the first game of the Scorchers. They got blown out by the Newcastle Eagles, unfortunately. But yeah, I was there for that, and then kind of got started going more and more. And naturally, as I was training to be a journalist, I'd still go to Scorchers games, and I'd offered to do work experience a few times. And because I had nothing on my CV really, naturally they said no. But then eventually I ended up doing some match reports for a local newspaper near Surrey in Guildford. So because of that, they then saw my match reports down at Surrey, thought, he somewhat knows what he's talking about a little bit, and then they kind of took me on from there. So naturally, just having a passion for basketball, and then supporting the Scorchers, I wanted to do something within British basketball. And I didn't know anything really at the time. I only knew the Surrey Scorchers. I didn't know much about the other teams. I didn't know much about who was involved. But when you're 16, 17, it's pretty hard to find out, unfortunately. These days it's a little bit easier, but back then, before you guys and BBL Fix were out putting stuff out every day, I mean, Hoops Fix wasn't as big as they are now on social media in particular. So that's how I kind of got into it, through that door. And then luckily, the stars aligned, and I got a full-time role in Surrey, and then the rest is history, really.
I remember when kind of I started a couple of years ago, it was literally just me and Ross, Brit Ballers. It was literally it was me and him, and then Fit, and then BBL Fizz came a year later, but kind of showed us like levels, came out with loads of new content that none of us were doing, and then kind of took over. But yeah, nice. It's great to see how many accounts are out there now, because there's
it's really good. Now. It's I follow those guys, and I get most of my news, BBL news, from you guys and Hoops Fix. To be honest, it's so refreshing, because obviously in football you have all these up-team accounts who will talk about football, so it's so easy to get information. Whereas these days, you can see every result from the BBL all the way down to D3 in the NBL. Everything's covered, which is great. So. I think it's, obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about it more in more detail later, but I think it's a really, really positive step.
Yeah. So you mentioned, did you say it was around 18 months? Sorry. So how did you find it? What was the experience like?
Yeah, so I mean, when I first joined, I was part of the wider marketing team at Surrey Sports Park,
Okay,
and
yeah,
obviously as part of that, they had a role specifically for their two sports teams, which was Surrey Scorchers and Surrey Storm, their netball team.
yeah.
So I took that role on. Originally, I was called the fan engagement coordinator, which is just a different way of saying marketing, I suppose. I was part of a team of 4 or 5, kind of doing stuff across the whole business. But my speciality was the basketball, and I joined the franchise when things were looking quite promising because ticket sales were going up. It seemed like the interest in the team was really there. And then during the season, we signed Matthew Rhino Manning. We had 3 sellouts in quick succession, and it was like, okay, we're really starting to turn a corner. And because Surrey unfortunately haven't always had the results they wanted because they're quite a new franchise. They were starting to really hit their stride a little bit, and then of course the pandemic hits and everything stopped. So for the first 5 or 6 months, I was in dreamland really because everything was how I was hoping it would go, and then of course it gives you an opportunity to step back and rethink things. So I think the first time that I really kind of stood out on social media a little bit was when I did some top trumps during the first lockdown. I basically made some BBL top trumps, and posted them on the Scorchers account, and I just basically put it out and said, anyone who wants a set to print off at home, just DM the Scorchers account. I'll send them to you. We had about 75 people message me, which was pretty amazing, really. But yeah, I got loads of good feedback, and then from there, obviously, because unfortunately, until the day I left, we never had another game with the fans, and that was a calendar year. So, but luckily, the season did carry on. The 2021 season happened, and then we played behind closed doors. And unfortunately, because of the way the BBL is, key motion's a big part of everything. And my view was, from a fan's perspective, what would I want to watch? And I really made a conscious effort to create a real TV experience as close as we could get to it on a budget, I suppose. And luckily, things went really well. We had a good connection and relationship with Stag TV, who work at University of Surrey. Like the students do their own TV show, and they came in and streamed all the games. And I worked really well with them. And luckily, Noel Gray stuck around as our commentator, and we had a really good production in the end. And we decided, okay, we'll get a pre-game show, halftime show on there. And, I was on there, and then we'd have Josh Bett, we'd have Gavin, our managing director, we'd have guests like Orland Jackman, Trayvon Wright, Vince McCauley. So it was really good to really have that production, because if the fans couldn't be there, at least they were getting something for their money, because I thought I didn't want people to pay £5 just to watch the stream and they didn't really get much value for it. Obviously, I completely understand that each franchise has their own priorities, and money was tight for everyone. So we were very fortunate to have that relationship with the university. So the second half of my time in Scorchers was basically being a TV producer, because I couldn't sell tickets. And then a combination of all of those things, so some good ticket sales before COVID, and then everything that happened afterwards and during, opened the door to go to Southampton. And of course, for me, I always said to everyone that if I was ever going to leave Surrey, because I loved it there so much, it was going to be for the NBA or the Premier League. So I stuck to my word and did that, and here we are. Yeah,
well, so something that's interesting, because you mentioned being a fan, is going from being a fan. What was it like then working for the club, but like with the players? Because I know from like for myself as well, even though it's not anywhere near as big as football is, you kind of, I know for me, I still see them as like these massive stars kind of thing. So I was just gonna say, what was that feeling like?
Yeah, it was, I've told the story a few times. Like I grew up, and I had pictures of Teo on my wall. Teo Ogdenby, who's still the captain there, and LVC Dusha, Will Neighbour, who were there in that first season. So of course, them being in and around them all the time, and Creon Raftopoulos, Caleb, and everyone, it was amazing. And I still feel starstruck by them now, to be honest with you. I've been very fortunate that because they've all got really good connections with people. I've met Joel Freeland and had many conversations with him, which was, a privilege, really special. I've built good friendships with Ryan Richards, Ashley Hamilton, Andrew Lawrence, people who have gone to, the very top, Matthew Bryder Manning. And, back in the day, I learned who they are. I saw them play in the Olympics and whatnot, and obviously never thought I'd meet them. And I did. I think the biggest thing, having been a fan and then working for the team, is you take the wins as a really good thing, and then the losses you take really hard. You take it really personally. And one of the things that I learned during my time is I obviously going in as a 19, 20-year-old, quite immature in the sense that you know, if people would criticize the team on social media, I'd be the first to bite back and say something, just naturally, because you really want to protect your team.
Yeah.
And then obviously
you
now,
kind of take it personally, don't you?
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, like, as everyone knows, I'm more than happy to be a bit cheeky to people on social media, but now obviously when you're in Southampton, when you're not affiliated with the team, you can obviously take a step back and see things for what they are. Whereas other people at the club who of course are Southampton fans, they are much more affected by the results than I am. So it's one of those things where it's a really good thing, because it makes you want to do a really good job, because it's your team. But at the same time, obviously, like, you have to kind of draw a line a little bit. So, you know, I learned lessons that way, and I'll be the first to admit that some of the things I said and did weren't always the right thing to do, but that's all part of the development, isn't it? So I think that, you know, being in my team, I wouldn't have had it any other way, because, you know, I always supported the team in Surrey or in Guildford, and it just worked out that they were very supportive of me, and I gave my all to them, and it worked out for both parties, I like to think.
Yeah, well, I definitely know. I kind of feel that the Scorchers' social media, especially over the period when we didn't have fans, you know, that whole season, and kind of the front runners to kind of show to other teams that weren't doing much on social media. It's, you know, look, you know, kind of step up your game kind of thing, because as much as, you know, teams don't have resources, social media, it's not too hard, and I've never understood myself why teams don't do it, especially when you've got guys that aren't associated with any clubs doing it, you know, with kind of little to no resource. So yeah.
I know what you mean. It's just like, I think my number one priority was always the social media, because I knew that's how you're going to reach new fans. Like, all the kids these days are on social media. All the parents are on social media. So if you use it in the right way, you can find new fans. And I think that if I was there now, that's exactly what my priority would be. And I think that, you know, even in my time in the BBL, all the teams have stepped up their social medias.
For sure.
Ultimately, if you've got someone that can do it full time, I was very lucky to be in that position. Then obviously I have the time to then do stuff and you know, and create that content. You know, I had access to all of the players whenever I wanted, which was really obviously a privilege, to be honest. So I think that it's such an important tool. And the teams that use it the right way will gain the benefits from that, and the ones who don't will get punished. And that's just the way it is. It's one of those things that if you're not on it now in 2021, then you need to get your priorities straight, to be honest.
Yeah. So moving over to Southampton, I guess, how did it, you know, originally come about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you know, I won't beat around the bush. I mean, I saw the job on LinkedIn like anyone else, and just thought, yep, I'm going to apply for that because it fits in with what my ambitions were. Like I said, I wasn't going to leave unless it was for the NBA or the Premier League, and it's the nearest Premier League club to where I live. So I thought, you know, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no, and I'm going to carry on in Surrey. And of course, you know, I got invited for an interview, and then that became 2 interviews, 3 interviews, and then they offered me the job. So it was one of those things where I didn't even think twice about applying, because I thought I want to see where I'm at. And at the same time, you know, I never expected to get it either. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I was expecting to get it. You know, I wasn't. So when I did get it, I was completely stunned, absolutely stunned. Couldn't believe it. I was obviously devastated from one side that I was leaving Surrey, because everybody knows how much I loved it there. And then at the same time, I was just completely overwhelmed at the thought of going into the Premier League. And incredibly, it's been 6 months already. It's quite weird to think about, to be honest, but that's how it came about. And luckily I had some really good support, you know, during that process. So I'm very close with Tosin Oliese, who people will know as the Baller's Voice, who does a lot of really good stuff in the BBL. He helped me through that whole process because, you know, I've come from journalism and then I've gone into social media / marketing, but I've never really done like hardcore marketing. You know, in the way that you've learned the marketing processes, then go into a marketing job. I've kind of gone into that role and learned as I've gone. So because he does marketing for all sorts of really big basketball corporations, he taught me the way and what I should be doing. And, you know, it's paid off, and really, really enjoying my time in Southampton so far. I have no regrets. I'm really, really happy here. And it was just one of those things where I kind of just took a leap of faith to see what would happen, and it worked out for me. And I'm really happy with how things have turned out so far.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So I've got 2 questions sent in, and then we'll get over to kind of the British basketball kind of segment, I guess I can call it. So my first one's from Jamie Furness. So I think yeah. Which current BBL team remind you of Southampton the most?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jamie. That's a really good question. I would say the team that first comes into my head is Cheshire. As much as you probably hate hearing about Cheshire Phoenix, it's probably because
I love it at the minute because you keep beating them. But yeah.
I would say with Cheshire is they're consistent. They're always in and amongst it. I think Southampton are one of those teams that are kind of now a staple in the Premier League. They've been there a long time. They're kind of one of those household names to be in the league now. I would say. Don't know whether everyone agrees with me, but that's how I'd feel. And I'd say Cheshire are part of that as well. They're always going to be in and around the playoffs or somewhere near there. Cheshire or Sheffield, I guess, would be those sort of teams I would say are in and amongst it. Like they're going to be pretty consistent year to year. So that's the first one that comes to mind. But that's a really good question because it's hard to compare Premier League teams to BBL teams unless you're talking about the London Lions and Man City. But other than that, that's about right.
So the next one's from Instagrimo. He said, "What are your favourite crisps?"
So Instagrimo is Ryan Morgan, who used to do the Scorchers job before me. He's now at Bristol City. So shout out to Ryan. That's such a tough question because I'm going to give such a boring answer. I'm just going to go with Pringles. Who doesn't love Pringles?
Sorry,
Ryan, that's a boring answer.
What flavour?
I mean, I feel like original, you can't go wrong. But then in the festive season, I'll mix it up with salt and vinegar, sour cream and onion. When you've got the whole platter out at Christmas and you've got the picky bits, you can be a bit more, flamboyant and chaotic with your flavours. So shout out to Ryan as well, because he did such a good job with the Scorchers socials before me as well. So shout out to Ryan and thanks for the question.
Yeah, so moving on to British basketball, a question and something that I always say is kind of that British basketball is too sensitive. And my argument for that is, I think because it's so tight knit, and because even though being in the community, you feel it's a big community, it is small and everyone knows each other. I think people are afraid to hurt people's feelings, which is something that is completely the opposite in football. So I guess my question to you is, do you think British basketball is too sensitive?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you that, I felt, I guess sensitive is the wrong word, but I definitely felt protective over Surrey when I was there. I think you're right. You could say I'm the pot calling the kettle black by talking about, it was too sensitive because obviously I was the first one to react when things would happen in the BBL. But yeah, I'd definitely say it is. I mean, obviously, I think you just nailed it on the head, to be honest. When you take a step back, you realise it is a small community. Everyone's working towards the same goal. But in football, because you've got such large fan bases, they can hold people accountable, players and teams. Whereas in the BBL, obviously, everyone knows everyone. Everyone's played on up-team teams in the league. It's one of those things where, exactly. And people always talk about what happened between me and Kevin Ware. I've never spoken to Kevin Ware outside of the joke we had on Twitter a year ago. But when I speak to Vince McCauley, we've always got on really well. And when I went to the Copper Box, he wished me good luck for my new job, and he came onto the Scorchers, pre-game show. So I've got nothing but respect for him and Justin Robinson and Joakim and everything that they did. But the jokes that we had on Twitter created a whole beef that created ticket sales on the streams. Everyone wanted to watch the Scorchers v Lions, which when it's first versus ninth or whatever it was at the time, there's no reason to watch other than the beef, if you know what I mean. So. I think those things really help. But at the same time, people can't say anything these days on Twitter without someone chirping back or saying something back. And I think, now I'm out of it, I feel like I can have a bit more of a well-rounded point of view and kind of see things from a different perspective. Obviously, it's impossible to compare, basketball ticket sales to football ticket sales or merchandise or whatever, because we've got all the resources in the world to do what we want to do. But I definitely think... It's good to be sensitive. It's good to be ambitious. It's good to have those conversations. But yeah, I think if I did it all again, I would probably take a step back and probably not be as vocal as I was about certain things.
Yeah. I know for me, because especially last season, I've not done it as much this season, but especially last season, I'd be talking on Twitter, and it wouldn't be saying anything bad again about anyone. It'd just be saying how good the Giants are, even though we didn't end up having such a good season. But I noticed that because I remember one tweet I put out, it was saying that we're going to go unbeaten and everyone's trash and all this. I remember people going like feeling like proper hurt, and I think that's because I'm so. Obviously, everyone started. I know for me, I've started being a football fan, come over to basketball, and I'm a United fan. So I'd always be giving stick to Liverpool. So so in my eyes, Giants, Cheshire is the same thing. So I'd always be giving stick to Cheshire, and I realised no one's giving it back, and everyone's getting hurt, and that. So I quickly realised that that's when it was a bit sensitive in my eyes, but well, yeah. So, but
that's
I still
the
do
thing.
it. I still do it anyway.
Like I think that the derbies they create ticket sales as well. They create that excitement because ultimately there's only 10 teams in the league right now. If every team had a rival, a derby, you have something to get excited for rather than playing the same team every week. I think that I tried to create that between Surrey and London. It kind of worked to some extent. But even when we played, obviously Ovi was there at the time, but we made it out as if it was a derby between Surrey and London. We were sold out and we won by a point, and it was a really physical game. Everyone was really into it. And that's what you want rather than saying, the London Lions are coming into town. Well, they're only 20 miles up the road, so we might as well make a thing of it, And in football, you do that 100%. It'd be a derby or a rivalry, whatever it would be. Doesn't necessarily have to be malicious, but they can be cheeky about it. You can have a back and forth and have fun with it as long as it's not offensive. But I think that's the thing, everyone gets a little bit offended by what you say, but that's just the world, isn't it? I think that unfortunately the football and basketball communities are so different where that football culture just doesn't resonate with some basketball fans, which is fine.
That's the thing, because like I said, like I still do it a bit this season, but I've kind of but yeah, it was quite funny because I put, in fact, because I put one out after I forgot who we beat, but then a day after, I think we lost to Glasgow, but I was saying we're going to go unbeaten and everything. The amount of people that, were replying and all, like going mental, it was quite funny. And then I knew some people actually like meant something by it because they were annoyed by, the tweet, but yeah, no. I think people need to do more, like I wouldn't say, I guess, trash talk, but just have a bit more banter. Kind of think, because I think people are afraid to do that and being afraid to hurt somebody's feelings and that. Well, yeah.
100%. I agree with you. There's people who have held grudges over me because I've had a cheeky dig on the Scorcher socials. It's nothing personal. Do you know what I mean? Like I think I made a meme once of Cheshire. Just I said something after we beat them, and then when they beat us or they made the playoffs, we didn't. They did something back. There's nothing personal about it. It's just a bit of fun, isn't it? And if it gets the fans involved and they have a bit of banter between them, then that's fun. And I think that might be one of those things that really that can take the league to the next level. It sounds ridiculous, but if your fans can be social and active on social media and having a go at each other in a decent enough way without being offensive, I think it can make excitement, and then people get really up for the games. They get more into it. They're more inclined to buy tickets and come and watch. It's those sorts of things that really make it exciting. So. Obviously me and you can kind of understand that from a football perspective, but if they can take a leaf out of football's book from that respect, then I think that it could make a difference. And I'd like to think that it did, in particular between my experience between Surrey and London, it did make a difference.
Yeah. So a question I've got, being, working for the Scorchers last year when with BBL player, what I guess, I don't want any kind of specific figures or anything like that, but what were kind of the viewing numbers like, I guess, because, obviously they were originally, I think it was £20 and then they changed the price and then they lowered it. But yeah, so what was kind of the return like on BBL player? If you can
of course. I mean, obviously I can't be giving away certain figures for different teams and stuff, but Surrey were definitely up there as one of the most viewed teams in the league. But I think the thing with the BBL community, which is what played into our favour, is that everyone watches everyone else. And luckily they changed the system so you could watch everybody. So ultimately it came down to the quality of your product. And of course, Bristol did their own thing, which was amazing. And I 100% support them in what they did and having their own platform. But if you're using Keymotion, I'm not going to pay $4.99 to watch it. That's just my view. If you're a diehard fan, I completely understand. But you're going to lose the neutral fans because they're not going to want to watch that. So
which is completely
for us,
fair,
so for us having like making the effort to create the product, and in honesty, it was of course probably not for the diehard fans because they were going to watch either way. I think that production was for the neutrals because if they're watching a Scorchers game for twice a season when Bristol play us, or if Glasgow come down and play us, they're going to watch the game for Glasgow. and then they get a bit more of an understanding of what Scorchers do and what our products like. They're more likely to watch again. So for us, we were definitely in the top three. I think I'm fair to say that we're in the top three in viewing, and considering where we finished in the standings, I think that says a lot about the hard work that we did definitely off the court, because obviously everyone's going to want to watch London, Leicester, Newcastle. So those guys, and Plymouth last year, they're obviously going to be near the top, but we were above some of those teams, which says, testament to the work that we did and everyone who put the hard work in behind the scenes to make that a good product. So I think BBL was a great idea last season because it allowed teams to have some sort of income. And I think all the fans were very understanding of that. We needed to make income, otherwise it wasn't going to happen last season. So, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and we made the best of a bad situation.
Yeah. So, and another question I've got, because obviously, people ask, players, actual pros, how, for anyone young, a younger guy who's trying to get involved, how do you get involved and stuff. But for anyone looking to get involved in sport but not actually playing, being courtside, doing media and that, what advice would you give to them?
Sure. I think you've got to be relentless. You've got to understand that you're going to get rejected, because, if you're coming in with no experience, you're going to have to sometimes make your own path and then do your own thing. You're not just going to walk into Sky Sports or the BBC. They're not going to give you a platform. And at the same time, you've got to think outside the box. So, if you'll know, Marcel, like, you go on Twitter after a football match, you'll have 1,000 people tweeting about the game. People will be writing their own match reports and whatnot. And, as good as that is, I think that what are you doing that's different to everyone else that's writing or talking about or creating a podcast or YouTube or whatever that might be? What are you doing that's different? So luckily in my time, probably a bit more before, TikTok and Instagram were as prominent, like I said, I wrote for the local newspaper and did some match reports, and that's what got me a foot in the door in Surrey, and everything else just played in my favour from there. Getting in there, having those experiences then got me the job, a year and a half in the future, which got me to where I am now. So I think that, the traditional methods of radio interviews and newspapers are still very, very valuable. And what you'll find, in particularly sports like basketball, is if you can offer quality content for free, they're going to take it. They give you a platform, you get experience, and then it kind of works both ways. So never rule out the basic options or traditional methods of writing, and then always try and do new things. So like for me, I went for a spell earlier this year where I kind of messed around with TikTok a little bit, and I've been helping a couple of players with their TikToks in the BBL. Shout out to Ryan Richards.
Ryan Richards' TikTok is brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. So that it was my idea to tell him to get on there, and we kind of made a plan. And he went into the bowl and met J. Cole, and he went viral, and the rest is history. So he's at 200,000 followers on there now. So things like that for someone like you or I to get on there and really create a platform on there is easier than ever to do. It's just if you know how to do it. And I think that my advice would be to try new things, try and get ahead of the curve before things get popular. And also don't rule out traditional methods of getting your foot in the door. And ultimately, you're going to have to accept that not everyone's going to take you on straight away. The guys in Surrey rejected me 4 times, but then 3 years later, I was working there. So, obviously you've got to have the willpower and the mental strength to accept that sometimes you're not going to be good enough, but you can get there in the end. And, I think you or I are good examples of people who have probably done that. So, I would say that that's the best advice I can give. But at the same time, if you want more in-depth information or advice, my DM's always open. I'm always happy to speak to people about it, because I always want to help pave the way for the next generation, even though I'm still only 22 myself, still paving my own way, but always happy to help others if they need it.
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, I guess the biggest thing I think that's helped me, and if I use my own experience, even though I'm only 16, but I think is just being open to anything, because I started with the Giants homepage, and then it's funny, Ross Brick Boilers, he messaged me when I first started saying you should do interviews, and then I was like, whoa, so then I started doing interviews, and then boom, I was doing interviews on my own page, and then eventually, the Giants homepage slowed down, started BBL because I'm thinking I need to break into the BBL, into the league community, because I was only ever with the Giants. But I think what I'm trying to say is just be open to anything, because then
that's really good advice.
Because then I got involved with the Giants. I was writing up a little form every game for the highlights for the players. They could put out a highlight tape, And then Liam Brown, he's not working at the Giants anymore, but he messaged me about the esports. I asked if I wanted to run the social media for that, so I did that. So I think the biggest thing is just be open to anything and try anything, and to kind of build more, expertise kind of thing. So yeah,
that's it. You've got to try new things and upskill yourself and be around people who know what they're talking about, so they can help you. So got to connect with people and build relationships and try new things.
That's a big one, networking, kind of knowing the right people kind of thing. But yeah, so, well, that's all my conversations done, all my topics. So yeah, it's been brilliant having you on. Thanks, mate. I've really enjoyed it. It's nice to talk about basketball for once. It's been too long, I feel like. Yeah. So it's been great talking to you, and I guess enjoy Southampton. Thanks, mate. Enjoy your season at the Giants, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.